Thanks for tuning in for this week's live Q&A. We're back in the studio because it's a bit of a rainy day out there and we didn't want to pull apart the hives on a rainy day, so we won't be doing a brood inspection this week, but we're in here with this observation hive that we're going to harvest some honey from. We did harvest a little honey last week, but let's harvest just a little bit more. One thing you can do with the flow hive is, if you're unsure of how much honey to leave for the bees, is you can just harvest one frame, or you could harvest maybe just part of a frame. So we'll show you how to do that right now. I'm putting on the little inspection brackets, putting on the, so this is a cut down flow hive, basically cut straight down the middle, and it's half the width of our normal 6 frame, matches the 8 frame Langstroth size. And we've got these big windows on here which allows you to see in, and you can see some honey there, but I can see a whole lot of not capped honey across there, so I wouldn't be harvesting this frame. Now here you've got a brood frame, and down here we've got another brood frame for the purposes of observation. And I can see a whole lot of brood beneath their feet. Give us a thumbs up if you can see that. And you might be able to see how it's a bit more brown, a little bit less see-through compared to the look of honey cappings. And we might even see a waggle dance if we keep a lookout for that. So I'm just trying to choose a frame to harvest part of, and looking around on this side of the hive, I can actually see this one's mostly capped. You can see the capping beneath their feet. Give us a thumbs up if you can see that. They've put their wax cap on top of the cell to say the moisture content's low enough, and they're keeping it like the lid on a preserving jar, so they can consume that later in times of need. And lucky for us, they often store more than they need, and we can share some too. Now I'm looking in and trying to gauge whether we can harvest honey. Now this one is showing a classic pattern of the bees consuming honey. See how you've got that all capped there, but then you've got these missing pieces here. And it looks quite different when they are filling, because it'll be more even as it spreads out, where here you're getting this checkerboarding showing that those cells there were full, but then they started to uncap them and consume the honey. Now what I'm looking for is the presence of nectar coming in, so that I can know that the bees are actually bringing in some nectar. And I can see it shining down some of these cells here, so I'm happy that they are bringing in some, and therefore I don't feel bad about taking just a little bit away. But as I said, we'll harvest just a small amount while you think of your questions, and leave the rest for the bees. I probably would just leave this hive to fill up a little more, but for the purposes of show and tell, I'll show you how to harvest just a little honey here. All we need to do is put this tube in the bottom, and we need to open this key access cover here. Then what we can do is just insert the key a little way. Notice there's 2 slots up there, so you're just going part way in like that and giving it a turn. Now that's quite easy to turn when you're only putting it in a small way. And if you wanted to harvest half the frame, you'd go half of that distance there. If you wanted to harvest a quarter, then it'd be there. You get about 6 or 7 of these jars from a frame. So if we harvest half by putting it in like that, then we should get ourselves perhaps 3 of these jars of honey. And there it is coming now. Beautiful coloured honey just flowing right out of the hive. It's always a joy to watch that and share the experience. Now we've got a interesting setup here. This isn't a typical setup. What we've done is we've cut a flow hive down the centre and tiled it out. So we've got the same amount of room as a single brood box and a single super, but we've stretched it that way. And at the front here, you can see the bees are going in and out the observation tube hive connection here. So there is no bees inside. And if we wanted to do our brood inspections, we would then close it off here and here, and then wheel this unit outside to do our brood inspections. So here we are. Yum. I'm going to try that. Any questions coming in?
Yeah, Seeds, of course, having this observation hive again, everyone wants to know, will you be starting to sell them soon? You might have started something there.
Well, let us know. It's not something we have in the plans, but if people really, a lot of people really want these, then of course we could do the patterns with our laser machines and make skinny observation hives. Okay, look at that, isn't that gorgeous? Do the quick swap like that, and away we go.
Seeds, just a couple of people asking, what is this, an 8-frame or a 10-frame hive that you've split in half?
This was your standard 8-frame size, which does 6 flow frames, so that halves better than 7. So we've got 3 across here and then 3 in the next box there, giving you 6 flow frames, matching the 8-frame Langstroth size if you cut it in half. We're making it more confusing now, aren't we? Halves of 8s and 6s and 7s.
Totally, oh my goodness. And is it made from Western Red Cedar?
Yes, so this is your Western Red Cedar with an outdoor decking coat. This hive was in a local cafe for a few years, and lots of people enjoyed looking through the windows at the bees, and now we have it set up here. But it is pretty cool because you can see what's going on. Look at these waggles down there. Look, there's a lot of activity just here, and the bees are doing their waggle dances. They waggle for communication reasons. Whoops, got to swap this. Now, where were we? Back to our waggle dance. You can see here this bee going around in circles and waggling. Give us a thumbs up if you can see that. Now, that's communication that can accurately tell the bees where to go and how far to fly. Shaking their tush like maybe 1 second is equal to about 750 metres of distance, they say. And if they're doing a figure of 8 dance, the axis of the figure 8, let's say it was on its side, the 8 pattern was on its side, then the angle to the sun is that axis. And that's how much humans have decoded so far. And there's also grooming waggles, and there's round dances showing that forage is very close by. But I am really unsure how they really tell such accurate information, because I used to be in the shed I lived in, harvesting honey in the conventional ways, and the bees would fly, come and smell that honey. The scout bees would come, and they would come through the roller door. They would go back to the hive, tell the hive where to go, and all of a sudden you're getting hundreds of bees coming into the extraction area. So naturally I'd close the roller door, and then I'd open the window, literally a metre around the corner. And what would happen is the bees would all come back and they'd fly around in front of the roller door and say nothing here and go back to the hive. And no bees would venture in the window until sometime later a scout bee found its way in the window. It would fly back to the hive and say, hey, plenty of loot there, plenty of honey to go and get. It's in the window just around the corner. And then the bees would all start coming in the window. So that tells me that the bees are transmitting a very accurate story of where exactly to fly, not just how far, not just the direction, but which window to fly in. So it's pretty cool, and I think we've got a lot to understand about bee communication, but it's extraordinary that they're able to really communicate in the dark and amongst 50,000 bees a story of exactly where to go. Keep the questions coming in.
Yeah, great, Cedar. Just wondering, what does this honey taste like in the observation hive?
Well, let's have a little... You know, unusually, this has a slight bitter tone, which I do not know where it's coming from, but it's cool because we don't get that often here. And you'd think that it might be the paper bark because that's been flowering recently, but this frame has been full for a while. So it's actually something that was flowering earlier on in the season, and I can't pick what it is. It's a fun game trying to connect the dots between the flavour you're tasting here and the flowers. One neat trick is you can smell the flowers, and that helps, or even taste the flowers by getting their flowers and whacking them on your hand, and you get these little droplets of nectar coming out. You can taste those and then taste those flavours in the honey to really join the dots. My kids love doing that, so in the mornings we'll go for a walk and we'll be bashing flowers on our hands and licking up the nectar.
Nice. And Cedar, can you get different flavours, honey flavours from the same hive?
Absolutely. So we harvested this frame last week and it was a completely different flavour, and you'll notice a colour difference as well. And what will happen now is this frame that we harvested last week will be filling up with what's flowering now, whereas this one's already got a lot of honey in it from a different time of year. So there's as many different flavours of honey as there are nectar producing flowers out there. So one really unexpected benefit of the flow hive is being able to isolate those flowers frame by frame. And some clever beekeepers are marketing that, saying single frame honeys, and actually getting a lot more for their honey because they are able to say this is the story of the honey from that single frame in that single hive. Now, I used to get all of the honey from maybe 20 hives and mix it together in the extracting room, and you get nice enough honey. But what I find even more interesting and intriguing is being able to isolate those honey flavours and share the story of those honey flavours with people, and it's become a real thing. And often people are saying the honey just tastes so much better, and I think that's part of the reason. I mean, another reason is you're not processing the honey in any processing equipment. You're not spinning it through the air in the centrifuge, so you're not getting that oxidisation, which is known to reduce the floral notes in honey. There's actually been university studies to say that flow hive honey has more floral notes and more flavour, and one of the reasons why is you are getting more pure flavours when you are harvesting frame by frame. So I really recommend harvesting into either one big jar or lots of little ones rather than into a bucket like we used to do, because you then get all of these beautiful flavours to share.
Thanks, Cedar. And so does that mean that the same bees that are bringing back in their pollen and nectar are going into the same flow frames, or how does that work in the flow hive?
So when a beekeeper says this is blue gum honey, what they're saying is this is mainly blue gum honey, because although one bee will probably only forage on one flower type in its lifetime, because they're only foraging for a couple of weeks before their wings are worn out and there's a quick turnover of bees. So although each bee might only go to one flower source in its life, unless that flower source runs out in its short 2 weeks, there will be multiple flower sources they're foraging from. So if we say that is just the paperbark honey, then it might be 80-90% paperbark honey, and they also might have been foraging on some palms and some ground flora in the forest, who knows. So we can't say for sure unless you're in the farming land where there is only one thing flowering, like beekeepers who say they've got rapeseed or canola honey are often out there where there is nothing else for the bees to forage on, and then they can say it's only that. So it's a bit of guesswork by saying that flavour is the paperbark honey mainly, so we'll call it paperbark honey on the jar.
Great. Cedar, Bee Amazing Hives, who's in Pennsylvania, is just wondering if they're getting close to their spring flow over there.
Exciting.
What's that?
Exciting.
Yeah, exciting, totally. And so they're wondering what's the season like at the time of the year for us here?
So we are in our autumn or fall, and for us in this subtropical region, we really don't get a winter as far as Apis mellifera, the European honeybee, is concerned. We don't get anywhere near snow, and the bees can actually forage through the winter, and we often get good paperbark flows as long as we get some rain during the winter time. So for us, we are heading into a time where we're actually going to get more honey than the summertime. The last half of summer, where we are in this particular location, is often a time without flowers and when the bees get a little bit hungry. So we're just moving out of a hungry time and we've had a lot of rain, and that's setting off the paperbark flowers, and we're smelling that. It's almost like a sickly sweet smell that's overpowering actually when the bees are evaporating the honey, and you go there of an afternoon, you can see them splashing the droplets around the flow frames and starting to do their work, condensing the honey. It comes in like fluoro yellow, and that's how you know it's the paperbark honey. But then oddly it turns more this colour when it's ripe honey.
Right. Benji wants to know if it's okay to ask you the question on Varroa, and also wondering if your bees here get Varroa, how you would treat them.
So Varroa's just coming into our area. It's been a long wind up here with it coming into the Central Coast, and they've had a few years to deal with it now, whereas we're only just experiencing it. So we have been paying close attention and learning from those that have had the mites for some time. So the things that we need to be doing at the moment is monitoring our mite levels and making sure they're not getting away, because what can happen in the initial build-up phase is feral colonies can be dying out. Your hive can go and rob the honey from those feral colonies and pick up all of the mites and bring them back into your hive. And that's called a mite bomb. So now the DPI is recommending every month to be doing your mite counts, and that way you'll know if you need to intervene. Now, we are currently trying different methods, and it's the first time we're able to actually use mite treatments in the area because they've just turned up here. So there's synthetics and there's non-synthetics, and there's lots of arguments out there about which way to go. And there's Formic Pro's one that's available. There is also oxalic acid is approved for use in the hive. Both of them are on the can be used in a certified organic way. And then you've got your Bevarols and Armitraz and your synthetics. So commercial beekeepers are often turning towards those synthetic ones, and backyard beekeepers are trying to steer away usually. But you know, it's going to be a little bit of a game of watching and trying to work out what to do next and keeping your colonies alive through this build-up phase. And we've got a whole world to learn from in terms of other countries have been through this phase already, and they're into management phase. And once you're over the hump, which is happening a lot quicker here in Australia than other countries, because there is no brood break and the bees are working all year round. They've got brood all year round, so what we'll see is quite an acceleration through this build-up phase, and probably what we'll see is a year, 18 months down the track, then it's stabilising into a lot more manageable mite situation like the rest of the world has, where they just need to keep an eye on mite levels and treat with their chosen treatment. And there's also a whole lot of people, and we did put some funding towards genetics as well to try and get ahead of the curve, because obviously if you can get the bees to sort out the problem and we don't have to deal with it, then that would be better. There's a lot of people working on that in the world as well. Long answer, but Varroa mite is a hot topic here in Australia.
Yeah, thanks, Cedar. Nicole's wondering, someone very new to beekeeping, and just wondering how easy is it to have one hive, and is also wondering whereabouts we are located.
So we're located on that east coast of Australia near a small town called Byron Bay, and it's got a lot of hinterland around with a lot of flowering species, and it's a great spot to keep bees. But bees are so adaptable, they'll live almost anywhere you have flowers at least. So most places, but not the poles of the earth, have flowering species. So we've been up into Nebraska filming, we've been into really cold places filming bees that get long cold winters, up into Canada, in North America, and also in the more subtropical regions like we have in the world. So flow hives do work in all sorts of conditions, whether you have a long, cold, snowy winter, or whether you have a hot, dry, arid summer, or in a tropical region. We have customers all around the world, and we have done for 10 years. So another aspect is you can keep bees in even a small backyard or on a balcony. If you have a look out here, you'll see a balcony hive we have right here, and that's nice because we can work on it in the rain if we need to. And my sister kept a number of beehives on a balcony in Berlin for a few years, so it's very popular in the city and urban beekeeping on rooftops and so on. So it's likely that where you are, you can keep bees as well. Now, there are some restrictions, so it might be a good idea to check that, but it's very rare. Most places in the world, you are allowed to keep beehives, whether you have a balcony or a rooftop or an urban backyard or farmland.
Right. Jason's got a good question, Cedar, about the hive that we've got on the inside. He's just wondering, do we have to lower the temperature in this room to match the outside temperature when the weather turns cold?
Interesting point. Now, I guess you're right. If you lived in a country where you had a long cold winter with no flowers, then keeping them warm inside will lead them to believe that that it's still a warm time of year, and they'll be a bit confused. Whereas in those cold climates, they'll tend to bunker down, the queen will stop laying, they'll breed bees, they'll lay bees that will emerge with higher fat bodies in order to last potentially 6 months of cold, snowy weather. Now, we don't have that, so we don't have to think about that. But if you were putting an observation hive in a warm room, in a cold climate, that's a really good point you bring up. And that's that you might confuse them. So having the room drop to the ambient temperature outside will then match the climatic factors outside and will be a better thing for the bees.
Right. Cedar, Megan wants to know, can you harvest wax from this hive?
Yes, you can harvest wax from any beehive. Now, if we were down here in the bottom box, actually these bees have wall-to-wall brood. I'm seeing a lot of brood down here. But oftentimes you'll get just honey on the edges of a brood box, and in that case you can take some of those frames out. We've got videos showing you how to do that. If you're using naturally drawn like we often are, you can pull those frames out, cut out a nice shape to take that wax away and put it on a cheese platter. You can keep the wax and make candles out of it. So any beehive you can get wax from, or you can add another box specifically for collecting honeycomb. Trace reading out the questions, she loves to do that. She's always bringing honeycomb in for everyone to share. And she does that by adding an ideal size box on top for the bees just to store honeycomb in. And of course you can then save the wax, just like any beekeeping, and do some craft or candle making with it.
Great. Oh, I just have to read this out. This is coming from Pam Packard and saying, I grew up with a glass hive inside our dining room. We had a great reference for the bees. My dad, who was a judge, also had a glass hive in his chambers up on the third floor in downtown Salt Lake. A glass
Nice.
hive. How
Glass
amazing
hives.
is that? I know.
On the 3rd floor.
Yeah.
Fantastic. It's a nice way to learn about the bees too. We do have a hive at home in the wall of the bedroom, and it's amazing how quick the honey flavours change, because sometimes you walk in, you've got sickly sweet melaleuca smell that's almost overpowering. 2 days later it's gone. Then there'll be another flavour coming in. So it really does put you in touch with what's going on if you have a hive in close proximity that you can see, particularly with the flow hive, and also smell those flavours.
Cedar, got a question saying, do you find having the flow hive inside, the way this hive is here, helps with pest control at all? Does it have any effects? Or?
I don't think it'd have much effect. I mean, all you've done really is put this pipe into the hive, and the rest is the same. So one thing I would recommend if you are going to build yourself an observation hive is keeping this pipe short. We found that if we had this long, then chalk brood would build up because the bees couldn't adequately ventilate their hive. Now, we might have got unlucky, but we struggled with the longer tube, and we ended up shortening it, and then the bees went ballistic, building heaps of honey stores, and they're doing really well now with a lot of bee numbers.
Got a few people I think maybe have just tuned in and seen it, so they're wondering about how we inspect this hive without all the bees coming inside the room.
Okay, great point. So what we've done is we've put wheels down here so we can wheel it outside, but of course we've got this tube connecting. So then we've got 2 closure points to limit how many bees we end up with inside. So what we do is we close this one, which then closes off the hive to the outside. Then we close this one, which will then close the bees coming in. And that way perhaps this isn't perfectly ideal because we've still got whatever bees might be in between these two that might end up inside. So you might grab one of your spare veils and catch them, take them outside, something like that. But basically you've disconnected it in such a way that this hive can be wheeled outside, taken apart to do your brood inspection, and the bees can no longer come into the room from the outside because of this closure.
Justin's tuning in from Gerringong, which is just south of Sydney, and Justin's wondering, do you suggest taking off the flow hive super box for winter and just maybe taking all the capped honey off that's in there and then take the super box off?
Yes, that's a debated topic. Some people like to leave their supers on for honey store, their flow super on for honey stores. So it depends a little bit on your configuration. So most beekeepers in the cold areas are suggesting that you keep a full-size brood box plus another box on top. So if you're in, say, Pennsylvania, where Fred Dunn is, the way he likes to configure his hives, and he's got some great videos to show you, is a single brood box and then an ideal on top, which is a 3/4 size box, and then the flow hive super on top of that. And that ideal is for honey storage and also a brood break, which is unlikely for the queen to then move up all the way and start laying eggs in the super. So he doesn't use excluders, and says that that works really well in that colder region to have a box and 3/4, if you like, to survive through the winter. Other places in even colder regions will say, no, we need a brood box plus a full deep size box on top, then your flow super on top of that, and for winter they'll remove the flow super, and then you'll be back to 2 brood boxes, if you like, that do have quite a lot of honey stores in them for that long winter ahead. So get some local knowledge and ask more than one beekeeper, because you will find you'll get very different answers. Then see what works for you by trying it out. But really it's about having enough stores for a long winter ahead, and if they don't have stores, then beekeepers will usually feed them prior to the winter if they can. And there's multiple easy ways to feed your bees if you need them to build some stores to last a long winter ahead. We don't have to worry about that here because we're in a subtropical region where we have flowers going all through the winter time.
Right. Sita, Andre wants to know, how do you balance the environment between honeybees and wild and solitary bees feeding and competing for the same resources?
So that's a great question. And I think as humans, we need to be careful because you get these arguments out there about, which is the best, should we even be keeping this species because they might compete with the native species and so on. And while you will find there is competition, what I see is boom and bust with the honey available, with the nectar available in the flowers, where there's plenty for everybody and then there's not much. There's overwhelming amounts and then there's not much. Now, you have to, I guess, consider a lot of things in here, and one is us as humans and the way we've set up our agricultural system and the issues that come if we lose this species. Now, Apis mellifera, the European honeybee, humans have taken all around the world wherever they've travelled because they're such extreme pollinators. And for that reason, they've become a really important part of our food system. A hive like this could potentially pollinate 50 million flowers in a day, and we do not have anything else that can do that for us. So very important for us as humans to keep enough of the European honeybee around, and that's why it's so important to have enough beekeepers as well. At the same time, we need to look after all of our native species, not only our pollinators, but all species, because we're losing species faster than we can count them. We are in the 6th mass extinction. So to combat that, we need to not argue about which species should be allowed, but put back habitat. As David Attenborough says, we need to rewild our world. And we can do that in our own backyard. We can do that by leaving spaces unkept, being lazy gardeners, by purposefully putting substrates there for the native bees that might like little holes in mud, or they might like the little bamboo tubes in little pollinator houses, that fundraising project we sometimes do. They might like just some garden mulch that's built up in the corner. And all of that is really important for those native species. But of course, planting flowering species will really help as well, because some of those native species only have a little short range of a few hundred metres. A few houses down the road is all they've got. So you putting some effort into habitat in your backyard just might be connecting a corridor for those species to then connect through and expand again. So humans learning to live in a way that's supportive of all the species is a really important and huge challenge of our time, especially with the keystone species, where if we lose them, things start to unravel. So I think it's important not to, get too speciesist about which ones should be allowed, but to put the habitat back. So for that reason, we've started the beekeeper.org, which is an online training course, which is made to take beekeepers from square one right through to a deep scientific knowledge in beekeeping. And experts from all over the world have contributed to that. And it gets rave reviews and is also an amazing fundraiser. It's free to try, and we're happy to say we've planted over 1.5 million trees in high quality regeneration projects around the world now, and we're continuing to support all sorts of pollinator projects around the world as well. So that's something that really lights us up and keeps us going, and we need to do what we can to help our little pollinating friends, as well as all of the species that need habitat.
So Robert, or Roberto, is wondering, could you do this flow hive in a shed that was inside a greenhouse?
We do get that question from time to time, and I think the answer is it depends. Chime in if you've got any experience with that or know anyone that's had success. But basically, bees like this, Apis mellifera species, will pollinate flowers in a huge zone. So they normally want to go 2 miles, 3 kilometre radius, right? But if they're hungry, they'll go 6 miles, 10 kilometres in radius. It's a lot of area. So if you go and then enclose them into the greenhouse, the chances are they will not have enough flowers. They are extreme little pollinators. They need a lot of flowers to collect their pollen resources and their nectar resources. So the greenhouse would be absolutely huge in order to maintain the colonies. It's not to say you couldn't shift a colony in there temporarily, but at the same time you might find bees pretty confused trying to get out of the greenhouse somehow. But nevertheless, I'm sure people do try, but I'm not sure how well it goes. There are other species you might like to consider for a greenhouse. Here in Australia we do have the Tetragonula carbonaria, a little black sugarbag bee that's a native bee that has shorter ranges and may be suitable. Chime in if you've got any experience with bees in a greenhouse.
Mandy's wondering, Cedar, how do you know when to harvest the honey from one of the flow frames?
Okay, great question. So when we built the flow hive, we put these windows on the side to give you a good idea of what's going on inside the hive. Now, if you watch it over time, you'll be able to see what's going on in your season. See whether the bees are bringing in nectar or whether they're hungry and starting to consume it. You can also see whether the outside frames they've put their capping on. Now, I can tell here that these bees did have a full frame of honey and they've started to eat it away. The reason why I see these missing cells here, when they're filling, they don't do that. They don't leave cells out. So you start to get this checkerboard pattern where the bees have filled a section and then they've actually chewed the wax capping off and started to consume honey from that frame. So what you're looking for is the bees that have been filling for a while and putting their wax capping on. And that is the time to harvest the honey, because the bees have gotten that nectar and reduced the water content down, mixed their special enzymes in and created the beautiful thing we called honey. They finally cap it over the top with their wax. It's like a lid on a preserving jar to keep that honey for a time in need. And that's the time where if they've stored a lot of excess, we can share some too. So you're really looking out for that capping is the short answer. But you want to see it all over the frame. You want to see a filling pattern. Now, the other place you can see, and it's not a very good example of it here, but this frame is empty because we harvested it last week, whereas this frame's still got some honey in the end. And you can just see that. We've got much better examples of that view, but that's a really helpful view as well. Now, you might say, but how can you tell what's going on the inside of the hive? And the answer is, well, you can use that view there and watch it over time. Bees fill from the center of the hive out towards the extremities. So watching it over time, you can get a good idea of whether it's likely to be full in the middle as well. And if you're seeing hungry bees like we're seeing here, then the chances are the frames in the middle above the brood nest, they've started to consume to feed the young bees. So they use a lot of honey to raise the brood as well. But see this checkered pattern where this was a full frame of honey and they've eaten it away and you've got missing cells. But what I'm seeing now is down the cells some glistening nectar as well, showing that the tides have turned and the nectar is coming in. So the windows on the flow hive tell a story, and with some good observation you will get a really good idea of when it's time to harvest or not.
And so, Cedar, do they take the honey from the flow frames and take it back down to the brood box?
Yes, the bees, if they're hungry, will be taking honey away from their stores and using that to feed themselves in lean times and raise the young as well. And they'll also be using the pollen stores or their bee bread to raise their brood. That's the really important food for the young worker bees.
Sita, do you have to feed the bees here in the cold winter, especially inside this hive here?
Generally, we do not have to feed bees in this region. There's always something flowering soon. Now, we do get sometimes where there's a month or two where there's not much around, but we don't get enough of a dearth, it's called, a time without nectar, to get out the sugar and start feeding bees. But other places in the world, it's very common to feed bees prior to a winter if the hive doesn't have enough stores to last, or in the springtime to get a jump on the season. Now, if they're feeding in the springtime, that's for the reasons of starting the hive to build up ahead of a good spring flow, so you've got plenty of bees to go and collect nectar when the flowers really start pouring the nectar out. Now, that's usually a thin syrup, a 1-to-1 ratio, sugar to water. If you're feeding to create stores in the autumn or fall, then you will be using a 2-to-1 ratio, so 2 parts sugar, 1 part water. If you've left it too late and it's getting really cold, the bees will not take syrup, so that's in those cold, snowy areas, in which case you're left with feeding them dry sugar if you need to keep a hive alive through the winter, which can be done simply by pouring dry sugar into empty brood frames, or dry sugar on top of the inner cover underneath the gable here, or a myriad of different ways to feed your bees.
Right. Sharon wants to know, Sita, how big of a yard do you need for a flow hive system?
The great thing is with the flow hive, we get to do some farming and have real produce to share with only an extremely small footprint. So you actually don't need a yard at all, and you don't need to plant flowers at all. We just plant flowers because it's fun and it really brings in the native bee species as well. Now, while your bees will forage on the flowers you plant, they won't actually get a honey crop from them unless you're planting acreage of flowers, because your bees will be foraging, you know, usually within a 2-mile, 3-kilometre radius, and bringing all of that nectar back into your hive, condensing it and creating honey. So your honey will tell the story of your local, wider area, not just what you have in your yard. And for that reason, it's popular to keep beehives in urban areas, on balconies, on rooftops in the city. And I think it's a wonderful thing because you get to take part in this beautiful ancient pursuit of beekeeping. You get to keep Apis mellifera species, which are important for pollinating our human-made agricultural world, and all of your vegetables and things like that, the ones that need pollinating. And you also get this extraordinary thing we call honey to share, and everybody loves honey. It's such a beautiful gift and tells the story of your local region.
Sita, Gabriel wants to know, have you ever thought of crafting the frames out of glass?
Crafting frames out of glass?
Yeah,
now,
flow frames.
We have, of course, thought of everything to do with our flow frames and materials, and the reason why we thought we crossed glass off the list quite quickly was it's very heavy and also very brittle. So you imagine the fine matrix you see here of the flow frame working parts out of glass. You're going to get broken glass in your honey, and that wouldn't be good.
Fantastic, Sita. How long does it take for the bees to build up to be able to start producing honey in the flow hive?
So bees can go incredibly quickly, and they also can be really slow. So the recipe you need in order to get stores in your flow frames is a lot of bees in the windows when you open the hive, i.e. your colony is healthy, they're bred up, they've got a lot of worker bees able to do that function of collecting nectar and bring it back. But you also need that to coincide with the flowers producing a lot of nectar. And when those two things align, it gets very exciting. Typically, that's in the springtime in most parts of the world, and you can get those exciting times where you put your super on and a few weeks later it's full. You harvest it and a few weeks later it's full again. But equally, you get times where your hive might be running low on numbers for whatever reason. There could be a pathogen or disease, pest issue in the hive, or there could be a situation where your queen isn't laying enough eggs. Perhaps she was poorly mated, perhaps she just is on her last leg. She's been around for several years and she's running out of sperm to really lay enough worker bees, and your population is small. And even though there's nectar in the flowers for the bees to get, your population isn't big enough for them to do excess stores that you can share. So for this reason, we do recommend having multiple hives, because that really increases the chances of you getting some good stores while the flowers are around. And to answer your question, in this area, we find that an average, we could harvest all the frames in our flow hive probably an average of a couple of times in the season. Now, that would be, we're harvesting just half of one frame today. This hive has 6 frames. We have this hive here that's got 7 frames. If you harvested all of these 7 frames, then you typically get about 3 kilograms of honey per frame. So 3 7s are 21. So you've got 21 kilograms of honey that you can get a couple of times a year in this region. Other regions produce a lot more honey, and sometimes those colder regions have an extreme peak of honey harvesting. Like up in Canada, people boast they can fill a box in a day. I don't actually believe it, but I'd love to see it. And you get people stacking flow hives multiple supers high because the colonies expand so fast that they need a lot of space to actually house the number of bees they like to have when there's just nectar dripping to the ground on everything that's going to flower is flowering at once in those extreme cold areas. So it really does differ where you are in the world, what's happening with your hive, and you may have to exercise a lot of patience as well. Patience is an important ingredient in beekeeping, where sometimes you'll be waiting and trying to see why your hive isn't performing, and perhaps doing your inspections, perhaps introducing a new queen with virile genetics to really pick up the numbers and go and get that honey.
Great. A few people have noticed on the brood box on this hive, on the hive set, all the action that's going on the bottom, and someone was just wondering, are they sort of racing towards the exit?
Yeah, I noticed that too. And that's interesting. Last time we harvested, we didn't see that. So it could be having all the windows off on the hive has got them a bit confused, and they're going, hang on, I'm trying to get out, I'm trying to get out, I'm trying to get out. Meanwhile, there's kind of like a double layer of bees. You've got the frame here that where the bees are just going about their business. Some of them are just trying to have a little nap, because bees will often be shift working, sleeping in the cells, having a little nap on the comb surface. You've got other ones that are waggling, like you see one here. Then you've got this runway along here where bees are heading out into the world because the rain's stopped and we're getting a whole lot of foraging happening. So if we pop this window open, you can probably see that. Let's see if you can get out there and see what's going on with the bees as they exit out the end of the tube that's connected to our observation hive. And look at that, plenty of bees heading in and out. It's amazing when you think about it, like each bee's beating its wings at about 230 times a second, they can head out to the flowers, bring back a payload that's almost their whole body weight with their tiny little wings. And they might do that multiple times in a day, but each bee might only produce 1/4 teaspoon of honey in its entire short life as a forager bee.
Fantastic. Rick's having some problems, Cedar, with ants, and Rick's in Western Australia in Perth, and they seem to be climbing up his legs, not his legs, but the hive's legs, and wondering what to do.
So ants can be a bit annoying. Most places in the world they're more of a cosmetic issue, but there are some ants like the Argentinian ants that will be a problem and can decimate a colony. Now, ant guards is a good way to stop them, creating some kind of barrier between your garden soil and your hive. Now, here's a simple little ant guard that goes here, and you can wind up that cover and bring down the lower cup here. And you might need to extend that out a little bit in order to get access, but basically you'll be putting a bit of cooking oil or putting some Vaseline in there. We've also left a little pocket under here to hold the Vaseline as well. And what you've done is created an ant barrier that's hard for ants to walk across. If you've got large ants, then leave the cover up a bit higher. If you've got small ants, then this can go all the way down like that. And they won't be able to get around through the moat of oil or grease. What you can also do is, if you don't have these, is you could put your feet in pots of water. So the legs would go on a brick and then in a tub with water in it, and the ants won't be able to cross over that. Of course, if you've got foliage touching the hive, then that won't work because the bees will just use the foliage as a bridge. So you'll need to get out your secateurs and do some pruning around the hive as well. And you will need to probably take off these window covers, take off the roof, don't forget the key access cover, brush those ants away. So you may need to do that a couple of times, and then usually the problem goes away till next time. Next time it starts raining and the ants get wanting to move to higher ground, and let's say the oil's then not in your little cups anymore, and you'll have to repeat that process in order to get those ants away. But don't be alarmed if it takes a couple of times of brushing the ants away to actually get rid of them for a while. Another little trick that some people do if they don't want to use the ant guards or create an ant moat is they will get cinnamon powder and put that behind the windows, and that will deter the ants. They don't really like nesting where the cinnamon powder is.
Great, I just wanted to do a big shout out to Happy Bubbles 83 on Insta for supporting so many community members and helping spread the love of the flow.
Thanks, Happy Bubbles. It's amazing to have just this community of people that are so giving. It gives you hope for humans in a way, that we're all out here helping each other, helping new people learn, and helping answer questions. So thanks to all of you who are chiming in and helping everyone around the globe by giving your thoughts and experience in the world of beekeeping.
So Sharon wants to know, does the flow hive eliminate the need for smoking the bees?
In terms of harvesting, yes. In terms of your brood inspections, no. So to do your brood inspections, it's much the same as any beehive. You'll still need your bee suit, your smoking, your gloves, and you'll need to be taking off the honey supers, getting into the brood and checking out what's going on. And many beekeepers, when they first start, are apprehensive about that concept, and you dial forward a bit, and that's the bit they love the most. And we see that again and again. So you might like to get somebody to help you do your brood inspections, but I'd really recommend being there and learning with them. And after a while, you'll tend to have learnt enough to get in there and start doing the brood inspections yourself. So you don't need the smoker to do your honey harvests, but always look after yourself around beehives. Some hives can have genetics that are really quite aggressive, in which case you need to really be wearing your suit and your gloves when you are near the hive. And mowing near the hive is another time you really want to protect yourself as well. Other genetics are quite friendly, where you can be harvesting honey without your suit behind the hive. But being a new beekeeper, err on the side of caution, give yourself a nice gentle experience in getting into beekeeping. We have our super lifter that really does make it easier to do your brood inspections, and a lot of people, we're just getting such amazing feedback about the super lifter and previously, and why we made this lifter is it has been quite a challenge for people to lift off the brood box, and that was the most common complaint. And we set our minds, actually more than 7 years ago, pretty soon after the crowdfunding, trying to work out how we could improve that. We went through crazy systems with drawers that rolled out and all sorts of things, and in the end we came up with this simple little device you can keep in a bag and then use it on all of your hives. So we didn't want to build technology into every single box with drawer rollers and all the expense that would go along with that. Plus we found the bees got quite annoyed and it was hard to keep them out of all of the mechanisms. What we did is we just made this super lifter here, and the way it works is you grab these handles here and you lift your super lifter out of the bag. Now we might just put this aside and give you a quick demo on how that works if you haven't seen it. It's always good to watch it a couple of times if you have seen it too. So basically you grab these handles here, move it apart. We've designed it so it perfectly sets itself up to then attach onto the hive. The only thing you need to change on your hive is these load point screws that you can see their brackets latching onto, then up to the load point screws on the top, and there you have it. We can lift this handle without doing all of that chiseling work to chisel your boxes apart. You've now separated even the most stuck hives. You roll the leg around, you put it down, make sure it's sitting nice and tight in, because this is a stabilizer for your hive when you then roll the box over like this. And actually, if you're in a hurry, in 15 seconds you're beekeeping, compared to that chiseling and really heavy lifting that we used to have to do.
So instead of painting the hives, could you dip the hives in beeswax?
Yes, people do like to dip their hives in beeswax as a wood preservative. So have a go at that and let us know how you go. My experience when we tried it, we didn't get the best aesthetic out of it. So, and another thing we did find is the panels actually swelled a little bit from dipping in the beeswax, and that made fitment just a little bit of a challenge. So for that reason, it's not our go-to, but it doesn't mean you can't have success with it, and we'd love to see a nicely waxed hive if you're able to do it better than we did.
Just back on the super lifter there, Sam, I know we get asked this quite a lot when you lift up that super box. The question is, do the bees not mind being tilted like that drastically?
So conventional beekeeping, if you dial back through our live streams, we are putting the hive exactly in that orientation normally. So we're lifting the box off and we're putting it on the end. The reason why we're putting it on the end is you're not squashing the bees here when you put it down, but also you're keeping the frame in that same plane. So a cell like that is just rolling around 90 degrees. It's not actually tipping over and letting any fresh nectar spill out. And we never see nectar spilling out of the frames by tipping it in that same plane. And that's why we have gone in that direction and not in the sideways direction.
Fantastic. And Seta, can you use that super lifter on a Langstroth hive?
Absolutely. So that's another thing we really wanted to design it for whatever type of Langstroth hives you're running, whether it be flow hives or conventionals, you can use our lifter. And the only modification you need to make is a few stronger screws that we supply that have a double head on them. It really doesn't muck with the aesthetic of the hive, which is nice. We did at one point have all of these brackets you screwed onto the hives, but having brackets on every hive is annoying for a start when you're putting boxes away and all sorts of things, but it also really didn't look that good. So we ended up building a system where all you need to do was put in these larger screws that have a double head, and we've actually had those on our hives for years in our apiary, and it was only a few weeks ago that anybody ever noticed they were there. Because you can hardly see them there.
Mandy wants to know, Cedar, do you reckon the bees can recognise people? Mandy finds that they got used to their partner, but not strangers.
So it's a really interesting topic, and the bee brain is a much studied and fascinating subject, and scientists are really struggling to understand how they can be so clever, if you like, but how little brain they have compared to our size. And bees have been successfully proven to tell the difference between one artist's work and another artist's work. And they did that by running tunnels with forks in the tunnels and putting artworks. And what they would do is they would swap Van Gogh with Dali and keep changing it around. And what they found is even if it wasn't the same image, it was just a similar artist's work, the bees could tell which way they should go to get to their hive. So that says bees have an amazing image recognition. So I'm not surprised if they can tell one face to another. But at the same time, bees have a very short life. So those forager bees in a month's time are all different bees. So perhaps if you haven't been around a while, they might forget your face too.
This is good. Commando 516 is saying next season they'll be getting 3 more hives, and they're involved with the US Agriculture Pollinator project. So that's pretty awesome.
Excellent, excellent. Love the pollinator projects. We've supported a lot around the world with funds we've raised from our pollinator houses and the beekeeper.org projects as well. And the more the merrier in terms of looking after our pollinators, because it's super important to look after the species that looks after us, being the European honeybee, but also all of the other myriad of pollinating species that are all around us.
Cedar, William wants to know that William built the flow hive but lost one of the William said the racks inside where they make the honeycomb, and wondering will it still work?
Okay, so the racks inside where they make the honeycomb, chime in and let us know exactly what you mean, but I assume you mean one of the brood frames. So let's just have a look at that now. We're using our super lifter again to just open up that hive and get to our brood frames. Now right here you see a missing brood frame. And that is an issue because in this section here, the bees will build some random comb, just like they will in a wall cavity or a tree hollow. And it's organic in nature and it curves and moves. And what you'll find is that it'll be unserviceable. We need to keep it serviceable so that we can lift out, do our brood inspections, keep an eye out, make sure we've got a laying queen, look for pests and disease. And for that reason, you do need all of your frames in here. So you need to go and get another one of these. Your local beekeeping store will likely have a brood frame like that for you. And in our case, we have just put the little comb guide in the top for the bees to draw their natural comb. We don't need to put the reinforcement of plastic foundation or wax and wires, we can just let the bees do it because these frames aren't going in a centrifuge. So you might have been talking about the little comb guide. Now if you were talking about the comb guide missing, the answer is yes, you can probably get away without it. But if you want to be on the safe side, get some paddle pop sticks and glue them along here to create that centre point for the bees to hang. And if you're talking about our flow frames, then you'll need to get in touch if you've lost one of those.
I just have to read this name out. Mother of 4 and 1 Viking who lives in Canada, living with a Viking, wants to know, would you recommend some kind of winter coverage for their hive in Canada? And if so, what do you think they should use?
Okay.
Viking warm or something?
Yes, what do Vikings use? Now, let me see, I'll scratch my orange beard. Now, it's a much debated topic whether to insulate your hive in a long, cold Canadian winter. So the place that isn't debated that you should insulate is under the roof here. So let's just take a look at that and discuss why. Now, under here, we do have a little bit more insulation than most hives because we've got an inner cover and then a gabled roof. However, you'll be helping your bees if you put some extra insulation up here. You can get some old bits of styrofoam box, or you can get an old pillow and put it up here, or anything just to create a bit of extra insulation. The reason why you do want to do that in those extreme cold places is you don't want the inner cover to get cold. If this inner cover's getting cold, then you might get condensation forming under here and dripping onto your bees. Now cold wet bees are dead bees in those extreme colds, so you really don't want condensation dripping off the inner cover. Having it wooden is good because you get a little bit of absorption of that condensation as it goes through its daily cycles, but having some insulation on top will stop it getting condensation at all in this area. So that one is not debated. Insulate under the roof. Now, when it comes to the rest of the hive, if you insulate the side walls, you will be actually potentially creating an issue where your bees are staying a bit warmer than they should through that long cold winter, and they might not hibernate correctly. They might consume more stores than if you don't insulate the edge. And people say, what about condensation? And yes, you'll get condensation on the inside walls of your hive if you're not insulating in those cold times. But many say that is an important water source for the bees during those cold times. So, for instance, you might have dry sugar feed. If they don't have any water stores, they can't dissolve them, can't consume them. And if they can't fly, they can't go and collect water. So condensation on the inside of the box can be an important thing. So insulating with a lot of insulation wrap around your hive in those cold times, you might be limiting the ability for your bees to get water if they need it during those winter months. As said, a much debated topic, so chime in, let us know what you think about insulating the outside of your hive in extreme cold winters like you have up in Canada.
Senator Vladimir wants to know, loving the observation hive, do you think this could be done in an attic space?
Yes, you could do it in an attic space. There's no reason why not, as long as you have enough room. Now, probably the main thing you're going to need to think about though is how you transport this outside when you do need to pull it apart and do your brood inspections. So here we have wheels on the bottom, and we can disconnect and close the way from outside, and then we can close the hive off with this one, and we can wheel the whole thing outside, and we can pull it apart when we need to do our routine brood inspections. So you'll just need a way to do that in your attic. Or perhaps you can pull it apart right in the attic and open up all the windows and the bees can go out again. I don't know, but that will be something you'll need to think about if you are putting an observation hive in your attic. But it would be super cool to have bees buzzing away up there. You could go and have a look and check out what they're up to.
Thanks, Seeds. It's sounding, sorry, I think I've lost sound from my microphone. But Fried Potato just wanted to know for a last question, is this a more ethical hive than a traditional beehive?
So the question is it a more ethical hive than a conventional beehive? Now, chime in, let us know what you think. The reason my father and I spent a decade inventing the flow hive was twofold. One is we wanted to be able to harvest honey like this while letting the bees be. I didn't like the hot, heavy, messy, hard work of taking the hive apart, taking those frames to an extracting shed, cutting the wax capping off, spinning it out, creating a huge mess. It's a big old deal that takes days of work. And I thought, can't we just tap the honey directly out of the hive into our jar while leaving the bees be? And that's what inspired a decade-long inventing journey with my dad, and that's what we brought to the world in 2015. And it was something so different, it got an amazing amount of interest, and here we are with a decade later with flow hives in every corner of the globe. Now, where ethics come in, it's a deep topic, so jump in, let us know, what do you think?
Thanks, Eden. Just noticing the hive that you're harvesting from, the observation on it, does it have the same tilt on it as the other hives, as the flow hives?
It actually does. If you look at the gap here to here, we have the level bubble more or less in the middle, showing our 3-degree backwards slope. And that's important when you're harvesting honey so that you don't spill honey into the hive. You want the honey to come out the back like this. So the question was about why isn't the hive sloped, but it actually is, must be an optical illusion here. Now, what we did today was just harvest half a frame of honey by putting the key in halfway. So I'm going to show you how to wrap that up now. You're putting the key back to a 90 like this, you're taking it out, you're putting it into the top slot. Make sure when you push it, you're pushing it all the way to the back of the frame. You should hear it knock at the back, and then you're turning that to a 90 again. That will push all of your parts back into their correct position. Little tip is leave it there for a minute or two to make sure all your frame parts are pushing back down. Otherwise you'll end up with issues later with wobbly shaped cells and lots of wax clumping, disrupting the flow path and so on. Now all we need to do is get our little cap that I always tend to lose and swap the frame for the little cap. Here it is. So we're just doing the hot swap, and if you're quick enough you don't spill any honey there, and all you've got is this, which you can enjoy the spoils, or you can even leave it on your jar like that for the remaining honey to drip back into the jar. Now, we don't have any issue with bees coming to lick the honey because we are inside, although we have got the window open. No bees have come in, which is good. And we've got our half frame of honey harvest with our, 3.5 jars. You get 6 or 7 per frame, so that all adds up to that frame being nice and full of honey. We're leaving the rest for the bees because we notice they are a bit hungry. They are bringing in a little bit of nectar, but we're leaving the rest for the bees because it is a bit of a leaner time right now. Thanks for watching. Chime in, let us know what you'd like to cover. We're always interested to hear your questions and always interested to know what you'd like us to do a show and tell on so that we can help answer your questions and help training people in beekeeping. If you're chiming in and helping people, fantastic. It's so amazing to have a global community helping each other in beekeeping. Thanks for watching. Same time next week. See you then.